God did not create groups. Man did. We human beings, over the last couple hundred years, have fallen for one of the truly great psychological games. We believe that we are parts of groups. Now, I'm not talking men and women. Those are the sorts of things that we are born into. We're born as men or as women, and we live according to the biology of those realities. That is not a chosen group. That is a physical reality. However, Karl Marx, convinces huge numbers of idealistic people who wish to eradicate poverty and oppression and tyranny that the only thing that matters is your socioeconomic class. Are you a worker or a bourgeois? Those are the two new industrial era classes. Workers are anyone who works in the new factories. The bourgeoisie or the capitalists are the people whose enterprise and financing builds the factories for the workers to live in. The two archaic classes from the age of feudalism are the peasants who work the fields and the aristocracy who inherit their wealth. But these fundamental distinctions are all different from one another. The two feudal classes inherit their status. The peasantry is isolated, rural, conservative, religious, everything Marx thinks is useless. The aristocracy inherits their status and power. They don't maintain it through talent, they maintain it through tradition. The bourgeoisie, the townsmen, come along and develop new techniques for production. And these techniques revolutionize the way we make things that we need. They, despite all the pollution of the early industrial era, dramatically increase the human lifespan and the human population. Industry also helps revolutionize agriculture, increasing production to avoid, at least thus far, a Malthusian population crisis. The capitalist or the bourgeoisie, the townsmen, do not inherit their status. They earn their status by being talented, clever, thoughtful, creative, brave. Their enterprise produces something new in the world, the means of production. And of course, there are the workers, most of which come from the peasant class, but they're fundamentally different. The workers are concentrated. They're not dispersed across the countryside. The workers are technologically savvy. They have to be to work the machines, whereas the peasantry is deeply rooted in the traditions of the way fields operate. The workers have to be organized because every factory is a group of people that are more than the sum of their parts. They produce out of their complex interactions, high degrees of product. So Marx says that your membership in one of these groups defines you. And we have 150 years of socialism that teach us that believing that you are a member of your social class first and foremost leads to governments that believe they can murder their way to paradise and lots of needless murder. 100 million plus civilians are murdered by their variant socialisms from 1919 until 2019 in peacetime. This is not a good record. Then there are the nationalists. The nationalists, another 19th century ism, convince people that what matters is their blood and their soil. Are you France Suisse, French stock? Are you part of the Deutsche Volk, the German nation, the German people? Are you of our blood? Are you a person who shares in our grand national destiny? This is the great siren song of the nationalist, born in Napoleonic times, just as the proto-socialism of Robespierre is born in the French Revolution. But nationalism truly takes hold as a result of the Napoleonic conquests and with the unifications of Italy and Germany in the 1860s and 70s. Nationalists argue against the socialist identity, saying that whether you are rural or urban, rich or poor, male or female, educated or ignorant, no matter what you do, no matter who your people are, if you are part of our national group, you share a glorious destiny. What matters is not your socioeconomic class, it is your national identity. Are you German? Are you French? Are you English? Are you Scots? Are you born one of the chosen people? Whether that chosen people is German or Russian or Polish or whatever other tribe exists in Eurasia. Racism is a subset of this nationalism. It says that there's really not much distinction between French and Germans. They're all Caucasians. They're all Europeans. They're all white. And as such, they have common interests, common traits and characteristics. The nationalist always looks to ethnic stereotypes for their truth. The French are romantic, and the Spaniards are passionate, and the Germans are self-disciplined, and the English are enterprising. And all of this has a basis in reality. There are national traits, but the racist takes these traits and combines them with a distortion of Darwinism. Darwin says that we are the product of really millions of years for human beings, and almost 4 billion years in terms of life on Earth, of a process of survival of the fittest, whereby beings struggle against one another to survive, to pass on their genes to the next generation. So racists assume that there are distinct human species, which there really haven't been since we wiped out the Neanderthals. But a racist will say that a person who is black, or a person who is brown, or a person who is red, or a person who is yellow, or a person who is white, to use the color distinctions, even though white people are really sort of pink or beige or olive-skinned, we are to see different people as different species of man. And all of the stereotypes that go with that. Blacks are great athletes, and they love singing and dancing, and they're not very sophisticated. So say the racists. I am not saying that myself. Asians are very smart. They're great in math. They're really good at being educated, but they're not the most physically forward of people, and so on and so forth. So in all of these cases, Marx says in so many words that 2 of his 4 social classes are defined by their birth, and the other 2 are largely defined by their birth, in the sense that many people who become entrepreneurs, they're probably the most fluid, but factory workers usually come from the peasantry. And as to nationalists and racists, birth is everything. This is a canard. This is a lie. This is a psychological warfare operation to persuade human beings that our identity is wrapped up in our birth characteristics. Now, for men and women, there is truth in that. Men are built to defend women who bear children. We are biologically programmed for men to be the hunters and women to be the gatherers. And so we were in the savage period of prehistory. And men and women have different physical characteristics, different psychological characteristics. If you doubt this, look at 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds play, and you'll see that boys and girls play in a fundamentally different fashion because they are developing fundamentally different roles. But men and women are not supposed to be in competition. That is a recipe for the suicide of our species. Men and women are complementary. Feminists say that that's not the case, but that's nonsense. Men and women are all human beings. But these other distinctions are distinctions of birth. And unless the sort of Kabbalistic Hebrew notion of souls hanging around in a room in heaven called the Guff, waiting to choose their parents and be born is true, which most Jews don't believe, and certainly I don't believe. And if I did, boy, most of us make some pretty big whoppers when it comes to choosing our parents. Birth is not something we choose. It is an accident of birth. It is a question of random factors. We don't choose who our parents are. And therefore, nationalism determines that, and racism determines that, and Marxism determines that you are defined in the most important way by something that you have absolutely no control over. This is the antithesis of freedom. This is the antithesis of agency. Human beings convinced that we're like dogs. Chihuahuas are different from Great Danes, are different from German Shepherds, are different from Golden Retrievers. We are not like dogs. We are sentient, self-aware creatures who think, who remember, who can anticipate the future. We are not drones in a hive. This is the great flaw in all socialism. Socialism is not a good idea that simply hasn't worked out in practice. It's a good idea if you're a bee or an ant, a natural hive creature where most creatures are drones and there are a few warriors, a couple males, and then a queen. Again, birth characteristic determinism. That's not us. All human beings today are of the same species. Racial distinctions don't really matter at all. Cultural distinctions can have very powerful effects. And while we don't choose the culture we come from, we certainly do choose, as adults, what we are loyal to in our culture and what we wish to change or reform or eliminate or rebel against. We are not programmed robots destined for a trajectory like an arrow shot from a bow. That is not what we are. We're free. We can reason. We can learn to reason. And our Western civilization, which is the only civilization on the planet which organically and naturally evolved notions of human rights and human dignity and human freedom, which produced the Republic of Rome and the American Republic and the outliers of Athenian democracy and other forms of democracy. The West asserts that we have value because Judeo-Christian norms, which were the heart of Western civilization from the 300s AD until at least the 1970s AD, say that all of us are made in God's image, and therefore all of us have priceless, inestimable value. If all of us have value, we should not be exploited. We should not be manipulated. We should not be treated like mere human resources. We are reflections of God, walking around his creation, trying to figure out what he wants from us and what our destiny should be. We are choice makers, and we can all, as the Enlightenment philosophers say, learn reason. We can learn to make prudent decisions in line with consequences that we can anticipate and predict, and we can therefore be responsible. At no time should a person who has inestimable value, because they are made in God's image and has the capacity to learn reason, be a slave. Whether it's a slave to some guy with a whip or a legal system that says you are a human being, whereas you are property, or whether you are enslaved by the psychological game of identity politics. As Joe Biden once said, if you can't decide to vote for me, then you ain't black. certainly the sort of thing you want to hear from a close friend of the former Senate Democrat leader Robert KKK Byrd, which Biden was a friend of and a close ally of. No. Culture matters. Culture is complicated. Religion matters. Religion is complicated. But what makes culture and religion dynamic is that however we're raised, as adults, we decide whether we are going to remain loyal to the beliefs we learn as children or whether we're going to stray from them and go on a different journey. It is not birth characteristic determinism. It's freedom, baby. It is what we were born to do. We have to stop accepting this blithe identity that we are born with that says that's who we are. We're socioeconomic workers and we have issues with management. We are Germans and we have issues with the French. We're Black and we have issues with the Asians. This is nonsense. This is a means of controlling human beings, teaching them that they're not human beings first. That's the lie. But we are brothers and sisters of the race of man. We all, except those who've suffered traumatic injuries, can reason. We all can grow up. We all can choose to be redeemed. There is no such thing as collective salvation, as liberating others from their situations. This is the great lie of American progressivism, that good reformer people can save others from their poverty. Some of the reforms that progressives have made have been helpful and good. And having good intentions is a wonderful thing. But you cannot save a group of people despite their efforts. The only people that can be saved are individuals who choose to change their ways and live differently. As a teacher, I have seen so many young people who happen to have minority birth characteristics, whether they are Black or Asian or Latino, whether they are native-born or immigrants, who have all the hope that a young person should have to pursue their dreams and to have big dreams. And the light of that hope is stolen by poverty pimps, by pushers of identity politics who tell them, no, you should hate, you should resent, you should turn away from the system and not be an Uncle Tom. You shouldn't play the white man's game. You shouldn't become part of mainstream culture. You shouldn't leave the reservation and betray your people. That's nonsense. It steals hope. It destroys lives. It is despair masqueraded as justice, social justice. Individuals can be saved because they can choose to change their ways. Most of the suffering that human beings go through is self-inflicted. And what that means is that we can overcome our suffering just by choosing to do the really hard thing of changing our ways. An individual can hit rock bottom and realize that the old ways do not work and that they have to change, no matter how painful it is, no matter how much it costs, because that's the only way to have a future. Individuals do that, men and women of all colors, of all social classes, of all national groups, men and women, humans all, choosing to change and to accept whatever salvation looks like given their situations. That is the truth. We should stop indulging the lie of identity politics. We should stop accepting it as a normal part of the background noise of our culture. It's one of the worst things about our culture. Women estranged from men, people of different nations estranged from one another, people of different races estranged from one another, because all of those divided, isolated groups, tribalized and set against one another, fit the exact plan of divide and conquer, which the Democratic Party of the United States and the woke movement and the social, environmental, and government movement and the representation and Me Too movements and all of the other left-wing claptrap has sold so many innocent people who have had their innocence betrayed by people who they should be able to trust in schools, in colleges, in churches, in popular culture, in society in general. You are what you're born to be. No, you are what you choose to be. We need to encourage people to take faith and hope and make choices that will lead to the pursuit of the greatest dreams that each individual might have. Life is something that should be faced with hope. And all the identity politics of despair should be rejected for the common good of all.